Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to today's webinar on rethinking how our careers might look like in the 21st century. I'm very glad that you could actually join us for today because we are all going through a very different kind of season which you haven't experienced before, but which is making us think about what we thought was normal, and now we have to find a new normal for our everyday lives. But even most importantly is how our careers are getting affected, how the things that we thought shape our careers no longer shape our careers. And so with us today, we have Professor Eliane Ubalijoro, who's going to help us think through this whole idea of redesigning science careers for the 21st century. How do we position ourselves as early career scientists to ensure we actually are able to respond to what is happening and we are making meaningful contribution to that? Myself, I'm Grace Mwaura. I'm based at the African Academy of Sciences, but I'm delivering or facilitating this webinar for you from my kitchen because that's where I am working from these days. So I will introduce Professor Eliane Ubalijoro. After that, she will talk for a couple of minutes, for about 30 minutes or so. And after that, we'll be taking your questions. So a few instructions on how we are going to do this today. For now, you're seeing our screens and you can see our videos. But once Eliane starts speaking, I'll switch on my video. Your video and your audio will remain muted for the rest of the webinar. If you have a question, if you go to here, you can see at this and see your name. You can raise your hand or ask a question. If you raise your hand, I'll be able to give you a chance to ask your question by unmuting you after Eliane has spoken. And if you type in a question, you'll also be able to respond to that question later on. So thank you very much for joining us. And now on to Eliane's bio, and then I'll allow her to take over from there. So Professor Eliane Ubalijoro is the Deputy Executive Director for Programs at the Global Open Data in Agriculture, GODAN. And she's also a Professor of Practice for Public and Private Sector Partnerships at McGill's University at the Institute for the Study of International Development. Her research interest focuses on innovations, gender, and sustainable development for prosperity creation. And she has been teaching for the last decade, also facilitating leadership development initiatives. She's also a founder of an international development company, which is actually a consulting group on harnessing global networks for sustainable systems development. She's a member of Rwada's National Science and Technology Council. She's a fellow of the African Academy of Sciences, but she's also a member of the Presidential Advisory Council for Rwandan President Paul Kagame since its inception in 2017. So as you can listen from her bio, she has experience of being an academic, having worked with consulting groups, advising policymakers, quite a rich and diverse career, you may say. And so I'm looking forward to listening to her this afternoon as well. And now I'll hand over to Eliane to take it from there. Over to you, Eliane.
Okay, so what I want to do, so hello everybody, whatever time it is for you, it's a pleasure to be with you right now. I really, this is a really good opportunity and time in our lives to be reflecting on who we want to be. The world is changing at an amazing pace, and so much is beyond our control right now. And so for all of you, it's not an easy time, and at the same time, it's also times of crisis are times of opportunity. And so my hope is that I'll be able to share with you experiences from my own life that could be useful as you take on challenges in your careers and you're able to move beyond anything you can imagine. So one of the things I would like to do is first, I'm going to, okay, so the share screen, yeah, show my screen, there it is. Okay, and then let's go into slideshow. So this is a very exciting time for me because I just want to say, so it all started 48 years ago. So this is can everybody see my screen? Just checking. Grace, is my screen visible?
Yes, I can see your screen very well. If you cannot see the screen, you can also let me know on the chat box and we'll be able to help you with our IT team. But I see it very clearly.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so what I want to do, so just want to start. This is me as a child with my mom. So we all start somewhere and we don't know what directions we're going in. So I was born 48 years ago in Rwanda, and I grew up on 3 continents, but it all started really with my relationship with my mother. My mother, before she started her family, was a math teacher, and she raised me and my brothers, encouraging us to be curious and to explore the world and to be of service to the world. And so that's something that has stayed with me my whole life. My mother passed away many years ago, but it's really the values that she transmitted to me were really important in my life and have really helped me live her spirit even long after she's been gone. And so when I was 17, I had these well-made plans. I left Kigali in Rwanda to move to Canada to the Faculty of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences at McGill, with the intention of getting my undergraduate degree in agriculture and coming back to Rwanda 3 years later to work with farmers. So a year later, the civil war started in Rwanda, and I actually spent time in Rwanda during a year, 2 years into my undergraduate degree, and it was a very difficult time. And what I realized is that my well-made plans needed to probably find a new route. And so I actually had not thought of going to graduate school right away, but I knew that given the fragile situation in Rwanda, it was important for me to actually look for alternative pathways to move forward in my life. And I went on and I started a master's degree in plant molecular genetics. And what happened was that while I was writing my thesis, my master's thesis, the genocide against the Tutsis happened in Rwanda. And it was a disruptive time in my life. And so in terms of having events that happen in your life that redefine everything you thought you were, this was definitely one for me. And so for the last 26 years, I've spent a lot of time reflecting on who am I as a scientist. So really looking at what is the vision I have for my life. What is my capacity to act? So in 1994, as a 22-year-old writing my master's thesis, I felt powerless. I felt powerless, but all I could do was keep on going every day and write my master's thesis, which I did. And inspire. At the time, my capacity for inspiration was very limited, but what I did do is the feelings I had, the anxiety, the sorrow, the pain, I wrote a lot of poetry. And so the combination of being a scientist and having outlets out of science to really keep my mental health balance were really important elements of my personal journey. And so from there, what's really important, a futurist I admired a lot named Buckminster Fuller, he writes something that I try and live by every day. He says, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So one of my mottos in life has always been to keep myself in a place of discomfort, so I'm constantly growing and looking at new horizons to move forward. And the only way you do that is really by keeping yourself in a place of discomfort, constantly learning within your field and beyond your field. So I went on to do my PhD in plant molecular genetics. My master's was in infectious diseases, looking at plant pathology, plant virus interactions. And my master's, my PhD was looking at symbiotic relationships between plants and arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. So my work, my graduate studies, my first graduate study degree was looking at plant disease interaction, and my PhD was really looking at symbiosis. And in a way, those are interesting ways of looking at life. What brings ill and what brings health? and what is it about the work we do as scientists that is so important for science, but also as personal philosophies on how we move forward in life. And after my PhD, I went on to become a scientific director in a biotechnology company where I worked for 5 years. And that was a really amazing experience for me because I worked in a setting where money was not a limitation. Whatever I needed, I could get. But what was really critical was building the most effective team to be able to ensure that the work that I was doing had maximum output. And there, what I realized is my science wasn't enough. I needed to know how to manage a lab, how to manage budgets, how to negotiate raises for myself and my team, how to organize my team, how to listen to my team to know what were their needs, what were they struggling with scientifically and sometimes personally, and how to be there for them. So that it was really an amazing experience. And it was also an amazing experience because we started out in a small biotech company that eventually was acquired by a larger entity. And so I had the experience of working in a small entity and then a medium-sized enterprise where we were over 100 people working together. And so those were really interesting preparations for me. After 5 years of working at this company, I had my daughter and I reoriented my career because my parents, my mother had died suddenly, and I wanted to be able to move back to Africa and be with my father. And at the time, this was a decade after the genocide, and so it really was a place where a lot of positive things were happening in Rwanda, and it was an exciting time. And so I started looking at reorienting my career, and I went back to university first as a research associate and then as an assistant professor in the Faculty of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences, where I had done my graduate work. And that gave me the opportunity to explore what would it take to build African bioeconomies. And in the process, I met some of the people you see on the top picture. And so Professor Timothy Giri, who was the director of the Institute of Parasitology, became one of my important collaborators at the time. Another person that you may all know in this picture is Berhanu Abagaz, who was the former executive director of the African Academy of Sciences. And he also has been very critical in my life. And so the work we did together eventually got funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we looked at the interfaces of plant biodiversity, microbial biodiversity, and infectious diseases in Africa, and looking at how bringing expertise that Tim Giri had, who now is a professor at McGill, but had worked in pharmaceutical industry for most of his life, and had been able to negotiate access to patents that had been developed while he was in the pharmaceutical industry. And we had access to those patents to help us do screening of African biodiversity. We went on a journey to try and find new medicines against parasites that are critical and that are really critical parts of neglected tropical diseases that affect about 1 billion people, and sometimes up to more around the world. And what was exciting about the work we did was that at first we just dreamt of what we could do all together. And so this was a combination of me as a plant molecular geneticist, Berhanu as one of the most eminent plant chemists in the world, and Tim Giri being a pharmacologist in North America, but who had done a postdoctoral fellowship in Sudan. It was us dreaming together. And one part we never really get to think about as scientists and researchers is what is the importance of dreaming what has not happened yet. And what was really exciting for me is that what I realized is that anything is possible if you stretch your dreams enough. And this eventually led to many adventures in my life, including becoming a member of Rwanda's Presidential Advisory Council. But what was really important to me was really this idea of how do we dream collectively with others. And ideally, how do we do that in ways that have amazing impact? So the bottom picture is a picture that was taken last year in Nairobi, and it was a very exciting time. This was the scientific committee preparing for the 2020 Next Einstein Forum that should have happened in March. And it was exciting because we were selecting the new cohort of Next Einstein Fellows, and we were excited to prepare what would have been a really amazing meeting in March. And so what's really important to realize is that my work has been science-led, but it has also been influencing policy. And so part of it has been high-level advising with His Excellency President Kagame, and having amazing colleagues on the Presidential Advisory Council of Rwanda that have really helped me grow as a person, as a leader, as a thinker. But it has also been working with female smallholder farmers in Rwanda on the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation grant that I led on amplifying the voices of female smallholder farmers using participatory art-based methodologies. But it also has been some of my consulting work. The top right corner, what you see is a picture of Haitian women from a peri-urban area singing after a demonstration of different types of pots that would allow the reduction of the amount of woodstock that they would be using to prepare their families' meals. Because part of it is, how do we innovate from the bottom up? How do we innovate in ways that really help the people who are most vulnerable and often the poorest in society to be able to contribute to economic growth, to food security, to sustainable climate technology adoption? And so it's really important as scientists to ask ourselves, how can our work really benefit people at all levels of society? And also, the work that I've done in terms of reflecting on my career as a scientist has led me to Tokyo, where I spoke at the United Nations University and was able to interact with leaders from all over the world, and especially Japan, and to really think about what is it to bring science, to bring policy, and to bring business together, and to look at how we can all be forces for good. And so some of the pictures you see here, you may see the base of Mount Fuji, where we were over 8,000 people, where we, in each official language of each country on the earth, we recited, "May peace prevail on earth." And so part of our journeys, our scientists, is how does the work we do allow evidence-based decision-making to bring more good in society? And so just to give you a little background, so the organization I work for, Global Open Data in Agriculture and Nutrition, was initiated after the G8 realized that food security could benefit immensely from digital open data, and that it was time to really harness digital data for agriculture productivity. And so the initiative was initially started in England in 2014. And in September 2019, it moved to Montreal in partnership with McGill. And I joined as soon as they moved to Montreal, because for me, this was a very exciting way to reconcile my pathway of 30 years ago, moving to Canada to study agriculture, and to look at how the fourth industrial revolution could be harnessed by smallholder farmers and really allow changing the capacity of smallholders to effectively contribute to the global and local economy. So now GODAN has about over 1,100 partners around the world. And so what's exciting about this is, here are the African realities of smallholder farmers. A smallholder farmer in Africa is around 58 years old. They have very little land, and they sell very little of what they produce. and with population explosion, climate change, and data inequity, what happens is that when you are able to give smallholder farmers access to data to help them plan their farming, to help them access markets, they easily increase their income by 30%. And so this is exciting. And not only is it exciting, but also in times like these, where many of us have access to our smartphones and can order things and can do things a lot online. Like right now, we're all over the world, but we're here in this forum together. Access to digital technologies for smallholder farmers also allows them to connect and power their businesses in ways that really can bring sustainable livelihoods. And the GODAN's primary sustainable development goal is target 2 is zero hunger. And so for me, this is really important. And right now, as we face COVID-19, all of these sustainable development goals are critical. And how we harness digital technologies to do what we can in terms of having goods, services, technologies move about in ways that minimize the potential spreading of COVID-19 is really important. And so what we're in right now is what some people call a VUCA world. And if you have never heard of this term, a VUCA world is a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And so it's really about facing turbulence. When I started my studies over 30 years ago, I could see my older brothers and people that I had graduated in the 80s find jobs and stay in the same careers for most of their lives. And the reality is my generation and people who have graduated after, we have faced greater volatility than previous generations. And so what's really important for us on top of our scientific expertise is to understand what is the volatility that we face. I know right now a lot of graduate students have had to stop their research because of COVID-19 and universities being closed. And so this is not something that you expect to happen while you're going for your degree and you're trying to do this as fast as possible. And the disturbance of something like this can set you back immensely. So at the same time, it's here we are on scientific paths, and then life happens. And so the more we're able to face volatility, the more we can face the uncertainty in the present moment. And the more we're able to navigate lack of clarity about the meaning of an event, and the more we're able to take on multiple key decision factors, the more resilient we become. And so this VUCA world, which is a very turbulent world, is something we all need to be aware of as scientists. And what we need to do is flip the VUCA. And flipping the VUCA is seeing where there's volatility and bringing vision. Vision again, dream beyond anything wild scientifically that you can imagine, and how your expertise can meet the needs of the world. Uncertainty. And all these things that are so uncertain, what is it we understand, and how can our understanding help others? We live in a time where there's all sorts of conspiracy theories floating around COVID-19. As scientists, we can help our friends, our families, our policymakers, our communities understand what is really happening based on science, and take away a lot of the fear and anxiety that comes with misinformation. And misinformation is an issue that will only be amplified in a 21st century where we're all so hyper-connected. And with the complexity that exists in the world, the more clarity we have on who we are, what our passions are, and how those passions meet the needs of the world, the more able we are to navigate the hard times. And these are hard times we're going through. And in terms of the ambiguity that we face, having the capacity to be agile, to be flexible, to bounce back, are really critical to keep our energies up and help us move forward. So one of the things that I find very important and has been very interesting to me is as a scientist and as a female scientist from Rwanda, with what my country has gone through, what I've realized is being a scientist is really important, and being a scientist with leadership competencies is even more important. And so part of what I do today is I actually facilitate leadership development programs around the world. And I would like to share with you some of the important lessons that I have learned. And so this paper that came out in 2019 is a paper that I've used in facilitating some programs that I do in global health. And so it talks about the 7 competencies of global leaders. And part of it, and they link to the VUCA world and navigating the VUCA. And so this is something I really would like for you to embed in yourself, is what is our capacity to tolerate ambiguity? And this is something we're going to have to handle more and more in the world. It's not going to be less. And behavioral flexibility. Remember the agility that we need to face ambiguity in the world, and empathy. Empathy, if some of you have been looking at the data, countries that are led by women have had a stronger, more effective response to COVID-19. And part of it, I believe, is really linked to what is it to be an empathic leader? And why is it so important in a world like ours, where science and technology are accelerating at such a rate that so many can be left behind? So empathy as scientists is really important as we connect to advocates in the domains that we're working in, and that we are listening to the general public, and that they feel that as scientists, we're here to be of service to the greater good. Having a capacity for non-judgmentalness is really important. Creating safe space for others to show up, to fail forward, to admit mistakes is really important. And when we are judgmental, it makes it very hard for others to be able to show up safely and learn. And learning requires failing, and failing requires safety to share our failures without shame, so we can learn and accelerate our learning rate for the greater good. Capacity to be social is really important, as well as the capacity to communicate, meta communication. So right now we're all communicating on this webinar. We're not going to have for a while anyway, for many of us, the capacity to connect person in person in our research and science work. However, we have this digital world that we can take on at so many levels, through webinars, through sharing our thoughts on our different social media platforms. And so part of it is, how do we take advantage of all the forms of communication that exist out there to make science more relevant to society? And something else that I find really important is what is our cultural literacy model? And as we work, and as researchers involve the African Academy of Sciences, so it's about all of us working with all the countries on the continent and interacting with researchers all over the world. And so what are important is our capacity for cultural mindfulness across our colleagues from all over Africa and all over the world. But as well, what is our capacity for critical thinking in terms of the science we're producing and the science we want to help move forward, and the research and grants that we're writing, and how does that show our capacity to bring and innovate in ways to bring forward science and innovation that serve society. And this is also about being a change agent, a leader, an influencer, because our science can really help decision making move effectively forward. And all this is possible, especially when we meet failures, if we practice curiosity. Curiosity is a really important element. I talked earlier about my mother and how she encouraged curiosity in me and my brothers. I think curiosity can help us see setbacks, not as crises, but as opportunities. And right now, as we navigate COVID-19, we really have to have that curiosity to explore what is it we as scientists can do to help the world be a better place. And so one example I just want to share is I'm an advisor in the International Masters in Health Leadership at McGill. And what we know with the Ebola crisis is, in some cases, communities were mistrusted medical doctors, researchers, and as scientists, we do our work, but we don't expect to actually face hostility out in the world. And some of you may have heard of different attacks on healthcare workers working on Ebola, and the misunderstandings that can happen. And this is a positive example of Dr. Marie-Claire Lama, who had a little girl who had been diagnosed with Ebola and needed treatment and refused to eat until she was able to see her little brothers. And so what Marie-Claire did is she suited up the little brothers of this girl and had them come and see her to give her hope and to give her the strength to persevere and to eat. And these are the small gestures, but these small gestures are ways we build trust with communities. And these are really important factors. So a colleague, Nathalie Duchesne, who's a medical doctor, global health expert, and who's now leading COVID-19 effort in Quebec City here in Canada. Natalie and I have worked on a model that I find that is really important in terms of project management, especially in science and global health, and all projects that imply science meeting community, meeting policy. So a lot of projects in global health are usually structured and initiated when executing and controlling. So funders decide what needs to do, and that's what's the work that will happen. But what we have found is that if you add an appreciative inquiry layer to it, so appreciative inquiry is looking what is the best in society that's happening and how can we amplify it. Appreciative inquiry was initially observed looking at women and who had better nutrition for their children in the exact same communities that were poor, and finding out what is it they were doing that allowed their children to be better fed. And so now appreciative inquiry is used in all sorts of fields around the world. And what it does is it amplifies the good. And as Africans, we know there's a lot of work that's all about poverty and disease and all the terrible things. But really, what we want is to be change makers and to focus on what is the good out there that we can amplify. So appreciative inquiry is a really important form of focusing on hope and what we can execute on and letting go of what we can't, and really working within our circles of power, our circles of influence, and our expertise for change. Something else, I show the example of Marie-Claire. Trust behaviors. How do we build trust? How do we build trust with our colleagues, with our superiors, with communities, with policymakers, with business people, with journalists, with communities? It's really important. And our capacity to build trust really allows us to exercise our work as researchers in ways that people will trust us with their information, will trust us to do good, will trust us to use science as a force for good. And the more we practice building trust behaviors where people see us as highly ethical and predictable, the more society supports the work we do. You may all have read all sorts of things around vaccines and people in Africa saying we don't want vaccine trials in Africa, or we don't want to be guinea pigs. But the reality is, as scientists, as researchers, what we want is to take control in the most ethically way possible so that African research benefits African health, environment, agriculture, food security. And we can only have that if our fellow Africans on the continent and in the diaspora trust that our work as scientists is of the highest standards to benefit our societies. And culture, how do we design a culture that allows science to be considered as important to decision making? How do we create cultures where science influences policy to move development forward in ways that are climate resilient, that stop pandemics and prevent pandemics ideally? And so this is about, culture is about what are the values we live, and how do we live them consistently in ways that really design society where compassion, care, innovation, scientific excellence are prioritized. And those are really important elements. And so some of you are aware that not only are we going through this COVID-19 crisis, but also there's this outbreak of giant locusts. And this, what's very interesting in the world we're living in is the level of interconnectedness. So the current locust outbreak in East Africa is thought to have originated in Yemen, fragile state that's gone through really, really terrible, difficult times. And so what does it mean, this interconnectivity in the world? Something somewhere else on the planet can affect us. And as scientists, it's about how do we stay aware of what's happening in the world? How do we connect with researchers everywhere else so that together we can really be working in meta levels in ways that really help society thrive? And so the pandemic is here, and scientists have long warned that the rate of emergence of new infectious disease is accelerating. And this is really critical in places where there's high densities of people and animals increasingly mingle. And so as researchers, how do we inform our communities about the work we do? How do we ensure that they have an understanding of what's happening in the world, and that it is up to us to really work collectively together to not only reduce the anxiety, but also do the work necessary to stop these pandemics from happening? And so one of the things that I find really important as we share this data with our communities is to understand that COVID-19, as a result of many things, including deforestation and change of land use, that has allowed diseases that affected wild animals to jump to humans. So there's a combination of antimicrobial diseases, that resistance that has increased the level of virulent strains of microbes in the world. There's intensified agricultural and livestock production that increases the probability of our food supplies to be porters of diseases that could come from the wild. There's the illegal and poorly regulated wildlife trade, which is a really big issue in Africa. And right now, because tourism is shut down, there are a lot of people who aren't getting any income from tourism. And so right now is actually a really difficult time that could lead to more illegal and poorly regulated wildlife trade, especially in Africa. And climate change. So we talked about the locust plague. How do we look at all these, and how does those affect the increasing zoonose emergence? And so what's really interesting to understand is that all these diseases that are being transmitted from animals to humans, there's 60% of all infectious diseases in humans, and 75% of all emerging infectious diseases. And so how we protect biodiversity is more and more important in the world. And so for our continent to grow, and for us to also cherish the biodiversity of our continent, Africa has 26% of the biodiversity of the world. The more we're able to take care of our biodiversity, the more we're able to buffer diseases that are present in wildlife and prevent any jumping to humans. And the other reality we need to face is population explosion. By 2035, half of the working population in the world will be African. And by 2050, African continent will have a population of 2.6 billion. How do we prepare for that? And how do we look at these pressures and what these pressures are going to mean for the continent and for researchers like us, and the demands on our time and the work we need to do? And so this is where it's really important as researchers that we ask ourselves, who do we have in terms of mentors in our lives, people helping us, supporting our work, and who could benefit from our work? Who do we have as champions who are willing to go and help us advance our level of influence in the world? And sponsors go out and speak on our behalf for us to be able to have access to greater funding, to greater opportunities for action. And the more we cultivate mentors, sponsors, champions, the more effective we can be. And sometimes it also requires coaching. So that is really the intent of going out there and getting personal support for yourself on a professional and a personal level to grow our level of self-awareness so we can navigate the uncertainties of the world more effectively. And so Albert Einstein, this is one of my favorite quotes, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that's created it. So as scientists, how are we elevating daily our level of consciousness? And I just want to share with you, so April 1st would have been Wangari Maathai's 80th birthday. And she said this at her 2004 Nobel lecture: "We're faced with a challenge that calls for a shift in our thinking so that humanity stops threatening its life support system. We are called to assist the earth to heal her wounds and in the process heal our own. Indeed, to embrace the whole creation in all its diversity, beauty, and wonder. In the course of history, there comes a time when humanity is called to shift to a new level of consciousness, to reach a higher moral ground, at a time when we have to shed our fear and give hope to each other. That time is now. And I think her words resonate today even more and more deeply. And it's important for us as scientists, as researchers, how do we live these words and how do we act on these words? And also, because these are difficult times, is to remember hope is not dead. It is just larger than our imaginations. Its purpose extending far beyond our comprehension. And again, dream bigger, wider than you have ever dreamed before. And so recently there was a climate justice conference that was held virtually because of COVID-19, and it was women and girls leading on climate crisis, and they came up with these elements that are critical to in response to COVID-19 that can also help climate crisis. And it's the first one was science matters. We must listen to the experts. And for us as experts, is how do we communicate at the level of the stakeholders we're engaging with? So we can't communicate over them. We can't communicate in ways that are condescending. It's really how do we see the stakeholders that are out there and talk not to them, but talk with them and dialogue with them so that they engage in ways that they feel that science matters and human behavior matters. What is people's agency is vital to bending the virus curve. I've talked about biodiversity. Well, the climate curve will also depend on it. Collaboration matters. We know as scientists, when we're able to collaborate, we're able to learn new technologies, new techniques, new ways of exploring the matters that are of most interest to us. And this is the way to bring vital innovation that is needed, whether it's for COVID-19, for climate, and for any other issue. And so we have to look at this economic crisis as an opportunity. How do we use this as an opportunity to emerge with a green, resilient, equitable economic recovery? And so this is really important. And what we really want everyone must be healthy for the protection of all. And so our interconnectedness really comes back in a more critical way. And how do we live that? And so some of you may have had time to look at this article that was published last year on me by Christine Rowe that was published for International Women's Day. And what was really interesting is Christine asked me a lot of questions, and she came up with what she felt were the 5 lessons from my own career that has jumped from being an academic for advising policymakers to now being a senior leader in a nonprofit. So I've worked in all sector, public, private, nonprofit. And what I'd like to share with you is those 5 points that she mentioned. And the first one, learn when to say no. So part of it is, what is it you truly want to say yes to? And how do you design your life to be able to say yes to what you need and say no to what takes energy that could be used for something you really want? Working across field has been a passion of mine, and you know, all of us know that innovation happens at the interface of different disciplines. Most Nobel Prizes happen at that interface. So wanting to be an innovator really requires us to be in communication with scientists, researchers that are on the edge of our disciplines, and to exchange, to find ways where bridging our knowledge can create innovations that are helpful to the world. Focusing on our networks. For all of you here today, I thank you for taking the time to come and to listen to me. And how do we grow our networks? And so how do we engage with policymakers, to business leaders, with nonprofits in ways that make us relevant? And this is, again, in order for science to matter, others have to see that as scientists, we take them seriously. And especially, how do we take away the complexity of some of the language in ways that we can explain things to all layers of society? And one of the things that I've learned is, whatever work you're doing, if you're able to explain it to a minister of finance in ways that he or she can see the relevance of the work, you have found a way of communicating your work that will increase your likelihood of getting funding. And as scientists, that's a really important part of our work. So hone your mission. What is it you're called to do in this world? Give yourself time, ask yourself, live the question. Don't rush into finding the answer. For me, what I realized is I have been interested in very different disciplines. And for a long time, people were like, well, you know, Eliane, just slow down and do one thing. But what I realized is I'm interested in building virtuous ecosystems that allow innovation to benefit society, especially in Africa. And what I realized is that requires building networks. And so one day I could be talking to policymakers, one day I could be talking to smallholder farmers, another day I could be talking to neuroscientists. But all of it is really, how do we connect all of the expertise, knowledge, whether it's high-tech knowledge or it's tacit knowledge and wisdom held in parts of society that are often marginalized? It's how do we bring it all together? And embrace adaptability. So life will throw you curveballs. And also embrace the lessons noble friends will bring you. And noble friends are what you would call an enemy, somebody who you think doesn't like you, who may envy you, who may try to sabotage your work. But there are always lessons. And ask yourself, instead of living in the frustration, anger, hurt, anxiety of those relationships, is what is this person here to teach me? And how will that help me grow in my power and my influence and my capacity to have more empathy and to have more impact in the world? And so that's why I call these noble friends, because they're there to teach us lessons, painful lessons. Remember, I talked about the importance of discomfort. So the more we're able to take on discomfort, the more we're able to be change makers. So I'm just winding down the presentation, and I just wanted to share with you these words that Dr. Martin Luther King gave on his final Christmas sermon. It really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. And so my question to all of you is, how can you contribute to light up a better future? And in the process, how do we lead for the greater good to protect our planet for generations to come and to improve our local and global society for future generations? Thank you for your time. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you very much, Eliane. And I'm delighted just to listen to you and to absorb all this knowledge and experience that you have. And I hope our listeners, you've also learned several things from this presentation. Now we'll move on in, to take questions. As I mentioned earlier, if you have a question, you can either type it into the question box or raise your hand and I'll give you a chance to ask your question directly. In the meantime, Eliane, I will post 3 questions, actually 2 questions that were sent by, just a minute, I will not be showing my screen, so I'll just cancel that. I will read to you 2 questions that were sent in by participants when they were signing up for the webinar. So there's a question here from Christina. Let me just get my screen right. In Canada. She is the co-founder of Biashara. She'd like to know, how do I position myself better to work in a traditional organization with a non-linear career?
Okay, that's a big question. So how, okay, so in a traditional organization, you will have pain points. So one of the questions I love asking people is, what keeps you up at night? And when you know what keeps people up at night, the question I ask myself is, how can I help others so that they can have better sleep? And so what are the types of solutions that you can bring in traditional organization? So it's in traditional organizations, people will have very difficulty accepting change unless the change will bring on discomfort that is not as painful as what they're living. So you really have to look at, what are people urgently wanting to change? And that's where they'll have the more willingness to innovate, to try out new things. So in a way, in a traditional organization, what you become is what is called an intrapreneur. And I really encourage you to look at a recent report of the Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel Prize winner. So he has a social enterprise research group, and they just came up with a report on what does it mean to be an intrapreneur in traditional organizations. And so how, as a change maker in organizations that have a lot of tradition, how do you go about bringing that? And so I think that may be a really interesting source of information for you.
Thanks, Eliane. The next question is from Regis, and nice to read a question from you, Regis. I know you from many years back. How does COVID-19 change the job landscape in scientific careers, especially for early career researchers?
So part of it, I think, okay, so short term, there's huge disruption. So for many of us, our work in laboratory, our work in the field is stopped right now. So right now is a great time to be reflecting, to be writing, to be reviewing the literature, to be looking beyond our literatures, to see how do things that are outside of our natural inclination influence the work we do. And so what COVID-19 is asking us is to be more nimble, to work in ways we didn't even think we needed to work. Right now, for all of us, we're trying to do as much as we can from home. And so part of it is, how do we take this opportunities to think in deep humility? How do I serve more effectively in ways that will allow us to strengthen our global and local resilience? And so I really think the issue of resilience is something we should all be thinking a lot about, and especially for early career scientists, because it comes down to how are we going to adapt to this COVID-19?
Thanks, Eliane. I can see we have Jejom who wants to ask a question. If you can hear me, I will unmute you and you can introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, this is Jejom. I'm currently in the lockdown in Geneva. I'm just wondering, how best can we adapt the experiences we have from communities of practice and learning networks in developing our careers, thinking of the future, our adaptability, and especially in this current crisis? How best can this be done, seeing as we are all locked in our homes, yet we are interrelated, and there's also the difficulty of not being able to perform as best as we would have under normal conditions. So just your thoughts, if you have any.
So your question is
so it relates to communities of practice and learning networks.
Okay.
And how best we can use these in developing our careers going forward.
Okay. So part of it right now, I think right now is really the time to be harnessing your social media networks and your social media presence, and to look at opportunities to connect virtually, locally, and globally. And so for me, what I realize is that a lot of people are using COVID-19 to have online events like this one we're having right now. And I really encourage you to explore all the online events that you can have access to through your community, and participate and contribute. And so part of it is, it's important right now to do the research to know who are the people you admire most in your field. Are they doing anything or in terms of the virtual world right now to connect during COVID-19, and to find ways to take part in it, to participate and to contribute. And so I think those are really important things to do right now. And I really encourage you. So for example, tomorrow INSEAD is having an event with Nobel laureate Denis Mukwege on COVID-19 in Africa. And so I'm gonna try and wake up at 5 a.m. in Montreal and listen to that, because I had the honor of meeting Dr. Denis Mukwege, and he's not only a phenomenal human being, a humble leader, but just an extraordinary thinker. And so any opportunity I have to connect with extraordinary thinkers right now, I really harness. So I really encourage you to do the research, ask your friends, ask your networks, what are the online Hello? Can somebody hear me? I'm just trying to check to see if this is working.
Yes, Eliane, I can hear you, but I had lost you for a minute, and I think several other participants lost everyone. So I hope we will be able to get back. Yeah.
Yeah, I see it's gone down, the numbers of participants. So
Yeah. So maybe let's continue, and I will try have the webinar should be able to continue without without me if I go offline again. But yeah, please continue.
okay, so
several people said it was frozen on their end as well. So it was a problem with all of us. So yeah.
okay.
Okay.
So I'm not sure where people start hearing me, but what I was talking about was the importance right now that it's about physical distancing with increased social interconnectedness, and to really harness this time to communicate with people from afar, and to connect with all the platforms that are currently available, where we can have the opportunity to listen to share, to discuss, to exchange with other people that we may admire, people who work in our fields, people who work in Conex fields, to expand our expertise. And so in terms of the communities of practice, right now, as we're all pausing and reflecting, it's a great time to connect in those ways, and to do your research in terms of finding out what is happening and how can you connect to what is happening in these virtual events that are happening all over the world right now.
Thanks, Eliane. I will hand over the mic to Haratu. Haratu Dauda, I'm going to unmute you so that you can ask your question. I'm trying to unmute you. Maybe you need to unmute yourself on your end, because it doesn't seem to work from my end. As we do that, I have unmuted Barbara. Barbara, could you ask your question, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can hear
Go
you.
ahead.
Thank you for the presentation. I am on lockdown in Cape Town. It's a simple question. I wanted to know how you managed to transition to consulting while still being attached to academia and science fields.
So part of it is how do you get your the work you're doing known out there? And so if you're going to be doing consulting work, part of it is what needs are out there that you can respond to, and how do you cultivate conversations with people around your expertise and their needs. And so for me, part of it was going to events where I really made an effort to speak up, so that ask questions at all events, whether virtual or when after confinement, quarantine is lockdown is over, uh, really stand out. You have to, especially if you hear something that's happening in the room and your heart starts beating faster, you're like, okay, this is my time to intervene. So and and this is not, you could be a shy person, but the thing is, it's not about me. It's about how can my expertise serve society. A good consultant is one that helps people solve problems, look at challenges they're facing in ways that they didn't think about. So you're there to alleviate suffering, pain in systems and groups. And it's how do you share that information? So what I do is I contribute. I do a lot of public speaking. Um, I contribute book chapters yearly. I've written blogs for all sorts of organizations, and what I do is I share enough for people know what I'm able to help with, and when that need meets my expertise, people come to me for consulting. And so that was really how I was able to grow a consulting practice. It was really about doing work, doing it with the most excellence that I knew how, and having that spread in terms of my expertise, person to person, but also growing my social media presence so that people were aware of the work I did.
Thanks,
Does that answer?
Eliane.
Yes.
Haratu's question, I'll just read it. He says, sorry, I'm not sure if it's he or she. Thanks for this lecture. I am a researcher with IAR Nigeria and also a lecturer in the Department of Agronomy. I recently realized I no longer in this field. I'm so confused. I don't know what other career options to try. Thanks.
Okay. So part of it is when you have a lull in energy, is to ask yourself, at what time did that energy go down and what happened? Sometimes you really want to change a career. Sometimes you may not be working in an environment where you feel nurtured. So you have to have clarity. Is it the field that you want changed? Or is it the leadership that you're working with that is bringing you down? And this is going back to the notion of Nobel friends, is sometimes people make you realize that the cultural fit doesn't work for you. And so what's really important when you're facing these types of dilemma is to ask yourself, what are the things in the world that frustrate you, anger you most? How do they relate to your expertise in whole or in part? And so how could that help you meet a need in the world? And so I really think anger can be a very potent driver to identifying what we feel called to do in our lives. And so, I explained I came to Canada to study agriculture, went on to do my master's and PhD in molecular genetics. But my career after my student life has really spanned health, agriculture, environment, policymaking in ways that I had not expected at all. But part of it is curiosity has always driven me to talk and learn about people and what they're interested in. And one of the things I realized is the more you listen to people, the more you ask questions, then they'll remember you. People don't necessarily remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And if you made them feel good, they'll say, you know what, I'd like to see that person again. Or they'll hear about an assignment or something that's going on, and they'll say, you know, we should consider that person. And so concentrate on making sure that you leave impressions on people that are positive whenever you can. And that means doing that in the most authentic and ethical way possible. So always work from your place of authenticity, and really ask yourself, where does the need of the world meet a calling, a frustration, and anger that I hold inside of me that links to any type of my expertise? So as somebody who has a background in agriculture, I mean, you have a background in biological science that can be transferred to a lot of interfaces. I look at the interface of agriculture and environment. So conservation agriculture is something that I think we need more and more in Africa to limit the loss of biodiversity. And so maybe you could stay in agriculture, but slightly go in a different space. Maybe you could go into agriculture finance or agriculture extension and communication. So there's so many ways to take your career in a new direction. And part of it is talk to people you admire, not necessarily saying, I want a job. And I think that's really the worst thing you should say. I think contact people you admire and say, I'm in a career transition and I'd like to hear about your own life and journey. And in the process, that will help you shed light in places that may feel dark right now.
Thanks, Eliane. The next question will be from Harry. Harry Akligo, I'm going to unmute you. Harry, proceed, please.
All right, thank you very much, Prof Eliane. I think this is a very eye-opening webinar. I joined in from Ghana. I'm an MPhil student in Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, reading a postgraduate program in molecular medicine. All right, so one thing I wanted to say is that I think prior to COVID-19, science-related career opportunities are not really abundant on the African continent. So you find a lot of graduates trying to, not getting into the kind of job or career opportunities that they train for in graduate school. Your case was quite, different because you knew what you wanted to do. And so you were able to, take decisions and then do things that obviously, landed you into what you obviously wanted to do. But today, being faced with COVID-19, we are coming to realize that science is becoming useful as a continent. However, I believe that it's still going to be a challenge to carve career opportunities in that field because we do not have what it takes to start biotech companies, to create the job pipelines for people to get into these related jobs, and also to innovate in that regard. So my question then is, most of the graduates or graduate students that we have want to get into traditional job opportunities, which usually doesn't give them the flexibility to innovate. How do you think that, the challenge of COVID-19 would inspire the minds of young people to think differently while they are in school, to begin seeing how they can become managers of their own fate, and thinking of starting research opportunities and starting initiatives that have the potential of solving problems? I think it's one thing that has been that is very important, because for me as an individual, I trained as a medical laboratory scientist, but while training in my undergraduate studies, I realized that this is not something I wanted to do, but then the knowledge that I was going to get from there was equally relevant to what I was going to do in the future. But then the question I always asked myself was, how can I be useful to the system? How can I develop solutions and not always be at the using end? But then how can I use the knowledge that I have obtained to develop point of care diagnostics that are relevant? So, I mean, when I realized that these are the things that are important, I started putting myself out there, creating a digital online presence, and then that was how I got to join a group I currently work with called the Open Bioeconomy Lab, based in the University of Cambridge. And I can say on and on, that is how the opportunities for me have been coming, all because I knew what I wanted to do. But then the masses do not know what to do. So in as much as we are trying to create a non-linear career path, I mean, some of these things are not preview to graduate students because they are not being exposed to the truth, the hard truth, and how they can maneuver their way around some of these things. Yeah.
So you know, here's the thing. Curiosity is free. Curiosity is free. And so this is something we really have to remember. You know, when I was hearing you talk, so I follow a number of African science-driven companies. You know, I would really encourage you to look at some of the sessions that happened at the World Economic Forum in Cape Town early September. There are a number of African CEOs of technology and science-driven companies. There are actually venture capital funds specifically oriented to technology and African biotech and healthcare. There are innovators. I think M Pharma is from Ghana, and you know, there are some great things. And so this again is appreciative inquiry. So if you try and find what 99% of people are doing, you're going to find that they're not exercising the level of curiosity that makes them stand out and create something different and new. But if you really hone in on, you know, who are the science leaders, who are the CEOs of African technology-driven companies, African biotechnology companies, companies that are harnessing African genetics to look at African diseases, people who are looking at screening and quality control of pharmaceutical products in Africa. There's a lot happening in these spaces. And so you really have to focus on where are the African leaders speaking and doing and how are they doing it. The other day I was listening to the founder of Ashesi University, Patrick, you know, talking about how his students didn't have a biotechnology department, but we're so curious about this issue in Ghana related to mining that was toxifying soils, that they actually went out and found this bacteria that could detoxify some of the places where mining was happening. And so curiosity is something we underestimate. One of the issues about appreciative inquiry, the appreciative inquiry teaches us to work and focus on our places of power and not our places of powerlessness. And so like for you, in terms of your outreach to have gone and connected to the group in the UK, Cambridge, you know, that is something you can do virtually online, and that, you know, doesn't really cost you much then beyond an online connection. So part of it is, how do we exercise our curiosity within the means we have, the budgets we have to connect? And what I've realized is when I have clarity on who I want to connect with and why, a lot of people are really open to bringing me into their networks. And so I really think poverty is really a state of mind that we can change by opening ourselves to the richness of curiosity and seeing where curiosity can lead us. I study African leaders, I study African billionaires, I study African writers, and I look at what is it to do. You know, you just think of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. What does she do? She takes words on paper that move people and have made her into a leader. And so part of it is, how can our imagination, our expertise serve? And we should not give more value to money than we do to our imagination, creativity, and expertise. And I really encourage that appreciative inquiry approach to be used in all of everybody's work.
Thanks so much, Eliane. That's beautiful, and I'm thinking about it as a person and wondering if I'm curious enough about my life and my career. So we have 5 questions. So the questions. And if you allow me, Eliane, I can allow 3 people to ask questions, and then you respond to that, and then we have 3 together, so that we also have time. So I will ask you to ask your questions in this way. Caroline Kimani, you will go next, followed by Kenneth Oparaji, and then Emmanuel Aji. So Caroline, I'm going to unmute you now. Please unmute yourself as well and ask your question. Okay, Caroline, since you have not unmuted yourself, I'll move on to Kenneth. Kenneth, are you able to unmute yourself and ask your question? Okay, that too is not working. And Emmanuel, we don't have your audio. Felicitas, are you able to unmute? Okay, Felicitas, let's hear your question, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much, Grace, and thank you, Prof Eliane, for the presentation. My name is Felicitas. I come from Zambia, but I'm currently in Rwanda, based at the Rwanda Institute for Conservation and Social. So my question was, you gave us some really good advice about how early career researchers and scientists could handle this current lockdown period. So what would your advice be for even younger students who are just starting out, studying their bachelor's or still in high school, considering a career in science? What would your advice be for them on how they can make the best of this lockdown period?
Okay, so so the best for me, this lockdown period, for the people who have the luxury of being in a safe space where they have food, where they have shelter, it's how can we use this time to reflect? And so I'm just going to do something. I wrote a letter to COVID-19 that I'm just going to share, and then I'll come back to your question. So I wrote, "Dear COVID-19, you're here to wake us up. Wake us up from our disconnection from nature. Wake us up from our disconnection from each other. Mother Earth weeps as she watches her rich biodiversity be depleted. As we whiz through our lives, our souls dragging behind our intensely scheduled lives, it is time for us, with much, to pause, to reflect, to give thanks to all those risking their lives every day for our food, our health, our electricity, our internet, all the basic services we, the lucky ones, take for granted. It is time to think of those who cannot self-isolate because they have no roof or are packed tight in prisons and slums. It is time for us to pray for those who have no income while we, in our stillness, can reflect, pause, and breathe in silence, not viruses." And so I wrote this because what I realized for me is, for us who are able to be in a safe place and are on a pause that isn't a place of deep strife, this is time for us to connect globally, locally, and to find ways to use our work in ways that serve others. So last week, I gave a webinar to environmentalists in Canada, and one of the participants was an 18-year-old young woman who has been leading a STEM NGO and who is now the youth advisor to the science advisor to the Prime Minister of Canada. And she wrote to me, and one of the things that I realized is there is no age for advocacy, for implication, for working hard. I mean, we think of Greta, and so part of it, and all the young girls that have been advocating around climate change in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, around the world. And so it's not only for early career scientists, but I think at any time, as I said, there are a lot of great events happening online right now that we have the luxury of time. And so if you ask yourself, what is the truest, most beautiful life you can have? Ask yourself, what are the events out there that can help me reflect, deepen the vision I have of the truest, most beautiful life? So part of it is self-reflection on what is that true, beautiful life that is yours. And part of it is, you know, there are amazing TED Talks out there. There are amazing, you know, webinars happening. There are amazing, rich information available. And it's how do we connect with all those spaces out there that align with who you are in your values. And that has nothing to do with how many diplomas you have. It's really about taking this as an opportunity to harness your creativity. What are the things that you would like to write about but never had the time to write about? What are the things you want to read about or learn more about? So this is the time. There's so much wonderful information out there. So I encourage you to go out and feed your soul with all this amazing information that aligns with what you're doing. And I just wanted to say, I am really excited about Rika, and I look forward to visiting your campus when I'm back in Rwanda.
Thanks, Felicitas and Eliane. So let's take the other two questions together. Caroline Kimani, I hope you can now ask your question. I have unmute you, I can see it's working. After Caroline, we're going to take the question from Victor Muposhi. So those two questions, and then you can respond to them, Eliane. Caroline, over to you.
Thank you so much. Hi, Professor Eliane. I am Caroline Kimani from Kenya, the University of Nairobi. I am a master's student. I am taking range management. My question is, after I graduated from my bachelor's, I immediately joined my MSc. And so through my MSc period, I've been able to do an internship and gotten involved in some short projects, usually between 3 months, 5 months. And so my question is, when I drop out my CV and share generally my work experience, usually the short work experience that I have has always come out as a negative thing, yeah? And so I'd like to ask, and also sometimes I get overqualified because of my MSc qualification. So my question is, as an early career researcher, what can I leverage on given my work experience and my education level? Thank you.
Just wanted to know, you said you're range manager. Can you just, I just wanted to.
Yes. Right.
So that's sort of rangeland management, right? Like the semi-arid and arid rangeland management.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Let's take the question from Victor, and then we'll have you respond to those two. Victor, over to you. Victor Muposhi.
Thank you very much. Hi, Prof. Thank you so much for the talk. Eye-opening, thought-provoking, and so insightful. My question is, when linear
audio from your end.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello. Try again, please.
Yes, I was saying, when building a non-linear scientific career, and yet at the same time we want to make an impact to society and contribute to science. One of the things you mentioned, you said the first one was being able to say no. As early career scientists, how do we make the balance, and how do we make that decision where we want to make an impact, and yet at the same time we want to explore further and be able to engage and be in touch with the world and have that global impact?
Okay, so part of it is, so when I was younger, so you know, I'm almost 50 now. When I was younger, if I had opportunities that were ethical, that aligned with my values, I said yes to practically anything, because I would volunteer anywhere I could learn something to help me move forward. So there's a balance on what are the opportunities that help you grow, and then what are opportunities that drain your energy. So part of it is balancing those. So I think when the earlier we are in our careers, we need to focus on growing our networks and listening to people. So asking a lot of questions and ideally doing it in ways that we're truly asking questions, not developing theses that have, you know, some type of question, but really listening to what people can share. And so for me, I did a lot of volunteering. I volunteered at any conference, any event where I could meet people who were more senior in the areas that I was interested in. And that really gave me immense exposure. And by being a volunteer, it exposed me to a lot of people at very high levels that I wouldn't have been exposed to. And because I was a hard worker, I'm the person, I will show up early, I will work hard, I will work late. And so part of it is I have a very strong work ethic that makes me stand out. And so that really helped me get to a place where at some point I had too many offers. And that's where I needed to learn to say no, because my issue at some point was that I had cultivated my networks at such an extensive level that I had more people asking me to do things than I had time or energy to do. So it's balancing time and energy. If you're an early career scientist, you have a lot of energy comparatively to somebody who may be older, who maybe have young children and older poor parents that are taken care of. So a lot of pressures professionally and socially. So part of it is, as a young career scientist, is how do you harness all the opportunities that come your way? And how do you ask people, what are opportunities for me to find things that I haven't seen? What am I not aware of that I should be aware of? And this is the reality, is that there's so much happening in the world. And so if we take our time, I just look at the fields I'm interested in right now with my position at Global Open Data and Agriculture and Nutrition. So every week there are seminars that are being held, you know, by groups working with smallholder farmers, by FAO, by digital data. Every week there's something happening somewhere in the world by big donors, development agencies. Somewhere somebody's doing an event virtually that I can attend, you know, while I'm in quarantine. And so part of it is developing the reflex to see what is out there, what are the newsletters I should be reading, who are the people I should be following on LinkedIn, who are interesting people, you know, in social media. So for example, I tweet regularly because I find that it's a good way to share the knowledge that I have found with people who may be much younger in their careers. So I encourage you, people you admire, follow them on their social media platforms. And that will help you see how they're navigating their challenges in their careers. And that will give you ideas on how you can do it yourself. And so, and also, if you have an interest, you know, write about what you're interested in and share it, blog about it, find ways where people find out about what you do, the expertise you have, so then they can come to you. So I encourage you, especially on LinkedIn and on Twitter, share your expertise, share your ideas, and then people will reach out to you. And you know, and when confinement and the lockdown is over, I encourage you, volunteer at any events where anybody you admire will be showing up. And those can be researchers, they can be policymakers, they can be business people, but I encourage you to go out there and create opportunities to listen to people you most admire, so that you can get a sense of how they moved about their own lives and how they can inspire yours. And so one of the things I love doing, for example, is reading biographies of people I admire. So, you know, Wangari Maathai, I think of Toni Morrison. It's really, it doesn't matter what field, Michelle Obama, but take the time to understand the journeys and the complexities of journeys of the people you admire.
Thanks so much, Eliane. We are almost at the top of the hour, just 5:30 p.m. So allow me to take just one extra question. I'll see if there's any other question that we may need to take. And for the others, we could respond to them either via email or you can type them in. So Edem Mahu, I want to unmute you. Edem, I'm looking at your... That's not Edem. Sorry about that. Edem, you have the... Edem, you may proceed.
Okay, hi, good afternoon, Ellen. Thank you so much for for the lecture. In fact, that's been so great. I am from Ghana. I am with the University of Ghana Department of Marine and Fishery Sciences. I recently, sent out a proposal, and I got my proposal, my concept got shortlisted. But they wanted to know that what exactly am I going to be able to do with this project with the current situation of COVID-19? So how am I still going to carry out my research? Because currently my country is in lockdown, my institution is in lockdown, I work from home. And the funders are worried. They wanted to know how I was still going to be able to, carry out the research. I do have some ideas, but I also believe that someone like you with a lot of experience, a lot of with your expertise, you might be able to share a bit of advice as to how that question needs to be answered, convince the funders. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. So one of the things, what I heard was that Ghana was loosening the lockdown. So I don't know if I heard this happened yesterday. So I would encourage you just to check to see if things have changed in Ghana.
Yes, so actually the question came before the lockdown, but Ghana it has loosened the lockdown, but my institution, the University of Ghana, is still under, still shut down.
Oh, okay.
I am advised to work from home, yeah.
Okay. So I mean, okay, we don't have a lot of time because I need to have more elements around your research. So part of it is you can do a lot of desk work while you're still at home. So literature review, online, you can survey people in your field. You could survey any nonprofits that are doing work in your particular areas of interest of marine biology that are doing work in Ghana to find out data. So you can do a lot of desk work, online surveys, virtual interviews of people to gather data. So part of it is that. And then depending on what your work is, there is satellite information and GIS data that can be harnessed. So I don't know the details of your work, but there's a lot of interesting work happening around harnessing digital data from satellites and GIS in marine world around, looking at the temperature of the waters and how that changes the life cycles and the reproductivity and the level of movement and growth of populations or depletion of populations. So I would use this time to creatively see what are all the ways you can actually start getting answers to the things you're interested in without leaving your home. And so I'd be curious, what is available in your field around satellite data, around GIS? What are the organizations that may be funding work and have reports that may come out in your area? So, I think of all the wetland foundations in the world. Think about what they're doing and how that relates to the work you have. Can any of that be of service? I'm a board member of WWF International. And so are any of the reports we're doing around marine ecology of interest to you in what you're doing? So use this time to harness the power of the internet and of the virtual capacity to connect, to gather data and knowledge that you can mobilize.
Thank you so much, Eliane. We will stop there for the questions, and I just really want to appreciate you for speaking and answering these questions for 1.5 hours, actually, and just how meaningful it is for most of us who are in early career, mid-career stages. When you're sharing your story of what you did and your voluntary work, it reminded me of my earlier years. I'm still young, but I do remember those earlier years in my undergraduate where I did as many things from environmental education to planting trees to ethnobotany to counting birds to working with farmers, and I'm still doing all those things. I don't know if I'm curious enough right now, but I think for myself and for the other 50 attendees we still have on the line, I hope this has helped you to start reflecting on what you need to be curious about, how you need to adjust yourself to fit into this situation. When you are responding to that last question of how you actually can continue doing research when you cannot go to the lab, it got me thinking of maybe we need to have this conversation more and more and help people sort of start brainstorming on the kind of things that they need to be doing. So thank you very much for this encouraging webinar. And I'll let you say the final words, and maybe you could mention your Twitter handle, because I did have two questions about your Twitter handle, so you can mention it as you're saying your parting shot.
Okay, yeah, so I encourage you to follow me. I'm probably the only Eliane Ubalijoro out there, and I think my handle is this, it's at Eliane Ubalijoro. So I encourage you, I really try to mentor at large because of the high level advising I do to leaders in the world. It doesn't give me a lot of time to do one-on-one mentoring, but I really put out a lot of interesting things on Twitter. So I encourage all of you. I will share things in all sorts of fields that may connect with something you're interested in. So absolutely, just know that if you want more from me, Twitter is a place that I really share what I do and things that I'm connected to or hear about from my networks that I feel could be useful for especially young career researchers. So please, I encourage you to follow me as a way to continue your own cultivating your own curiosity. And I thank you for the time you've taken, and I want health and curiosity for everybody on this call so that we can all collectively continue to grow a healthy, prosperous, green Africa. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eliane, and thank you to all of you. As we advertise these webinars, we are running a webinar every month, and we hope that during this season of COVID-19, we'll be able to bring you webinars that are going to help make this season even much better for you. They are part of the AAS mentoring scheme. Some of you who have seen are affiliates of the Academy or grantees of the Academy. You will be aware of this, but they are open to the wider public, and we target early career researchers, mostly postdocs and above. But I'm also glad today we had master's and PhD students. So I hope this has also been beneficial to you. So look out for the next webinar. It will be on the 20th of May. We will soon be advertising that. You can sign up and be part of the conversation. Send us your feedback on other kind of topics you'd like us to discuss, and we'll be happy to look for the right speakers for that. So thank you very much. Enjoy your day, evening, night, or afternoon. And Eliane, have a lovely day down there in Canada.
Thank you very much, Grace.
Thank you so much.